Today's seminar complements the Amphibious Operations seminar in that it describes Australia's first military campaign of the Great War, a campaign which was an amphibious campaign. Indeed, it included all recognised forms of amphibious operation except an amphibious withdrawal, and from it emerged lessons of ensuring strategic and operational importance for Australia. Being an amphibious campaign, the force that conducted it was what we would call today a joint force. It had both an on-sea component and an on-land component. The on-sea component was variously called His Majesty's Australian Fleet, the Australian Fleet Unit, and the Australian Squadron. For our purposes today, all three terms mean the same thing. The Australian Fleet was commanded by Rear Admiral Sir George Patey, Royal Navy, who during the course of the campaign was promoted to Vice Admiral. He was also the overall commander of the joint force. The on-land component was called the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force. This terminology can seem confusing to us today because the naval component of this force did not involve ships. Rather, it consisted of soldiers who were owned by the Navy. They were naval infantry trained to fight ashore, especially as landing parties. And they consisted mainly of naval reservists, people who weren't needed very much in peacetime, but were called up when they were needed in times of crisis. But they had reasonable training. The soldiers of the military component of the ANMEF were also infantry, but infantry owned by the Army, more like we would understand it today. The 500 naval infantry were formed into 6 companies, which were together called a naval brigade. And the 1,000-odd infantry, military infantry, were grouped into 8 companies, which together were called an infantry battalion. The Naval Brigade and the Infantry Battalion, along with some combat and logistic support units, collectively constituted the ANMEF, which was under the command of a World War veteran, Colonel William Holmes, DSO. And just to add further confusion, he was referred to as the Brigadier commanding the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force. He commanded in the rank of Colonel. The naval infantry overall were better trained at this stage of the war than were their military colleagues, and they bore the brunt of the fighting and the casualties on the first day of the campaign ashore. And you'll hear that, particularly when we come to the third presentation about the fighting ashore. The campaign was conducted between August and December 1914. It began with the Australian fleet raiding Rabaul on 11 August and then effectively neutralising the German East Asiatic cruiser squadron, which was unwilling to offer battle, as the Australian flagship HMAS Australia, a battle cruiser, outgunned the German ships. Next, the fleet assisted the New Zealand Expeditionary Force's occupation of German Samoa on the 30th of August. The campaign in New Guinea began on the 11th of September in Blanche Bay, East New Britain, with the amphibious landing of elements of the ANMEF at Herbeshaw and Cabacal, followed by the capture of Bitter Park Wireless Station, and then the following day the capture of Rabaul. Over the next 3 months, the ANMEF, supported by ships of the Australian and French fleets, occupied all German possessions south of the equator, concluding with the occupation of the German Solomon Islands in December. An Australian military government then administered the German colonies, which remained, I should say, German possessions. They weren't taken over by Australia to become Australian possessions. They remained German colonies, but under Australian military government for the remainder of the war. The ANMEF campaign has been largely overlooked in the public arena where the national focus has been on the later Great War campaigns in Gallipoli, Palestine, France and Flanders. So it is both appropriate and timely, this year being its centenary, that we should examine it today. A panel of 7 historians will now explain the strategic, political and social background of the campaign, the naval operations in the Pacific in 1914, the raising of the ANMEF and its operations in Papua New Guinea, the contemporary operations of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force in German Samoa, and the aftermath of the campaign. The formal presentations will be followed by a question and answer session with the panel, and I request that you keep your questions until then. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you find the seminar both educational and enjoyable. Thank you.